On Tuesday this week, Prime Minister Mark Carney gave his first interview since the election to CTV News. It was a good interview, and in it he said he would consider building a pipeline if there was consensus. Now, consensus is a hole, I think, big enough to drive a truck through. Who can tell when consensus is reached? What's the definition? There isn't one. But I instantly was called by a radio host from Ontario to ask, hey, Carney says he's in favor of a pipeline. You guys in Alberta must be happy now, right? No. We're going to be skeptical for a long time about Mark Carney. Even just on pipelines, the man has sent so many conflicting signals, it's hard to tell what he really means. When he was running for the Liberal leadership, he said he would consider using the emergency powers of the federal government to get a pipeline built. 4 days later, when he's in Quebec, he said, no, I would never do that if Quebec were opposed. During the election campaign, he says, we need to have a big national project. We need to be an international superpower in energy. And then he says, and a pipeline might be part of that. It might not. That's the problem with Mark Carney. He's trying to have both sides at the same time. He's trying to have it both ways. That doesn't work. And it doesn't impress anybody in Alberta. He can say to the CTV interviewer, yes, I'm in favor of a pipeline, so long as there's consensus. But then he goes and he appoints Julie Bruuen, a Toronto MP, as the environment minister, and Bruuen is as anti-oil as anyone in the Liberal caucus. So what does that mean? Carney can go to CTV and he can say, yes, I'm in favor of a pipeline as long as there's consensus. But then the next morning he lets Stephen Gibo, who used to be the environment minister, who came up with most of the offensive regulations that Alberta is opposed to, he lets Stephen Gibo, who's now the culture minister, say, well, we don't need a pipeline. I have predicted all along that that's exactly what these Liberals are going to do. They're going to say, gee, the transition to a fossil fuel-free environment, a fossil fuel-free economy is going so well, we don't need another pipeline. There isn't going to be enough demand. It's going to be like when Justin Trudeau said there was no business case for selling LNG to Germany. There was a business case then. There's a business case now. It's not even in doubt that there's a business case. But they made that argument so they didn't have to accept the idea of building an LNG pipeline across Quebec into the Atlantic provinces to make a port to send it off to Europe. And they're going to do the same thing with oil sands bitumen and with conventional oil. They're going to say there is no business case for it. Stephen Gibo said, the International Energy Association, the International Energy Administration said by 2028 or 2029, we'll be at peak oil. The world will be using as much oil as it ever will, and from there it'll decline and we won't need pipelines. I have heard the argument that we're going to reach peak oil so many times, I wish I had had a nickel for every time I'd heard it, because then I could retire. It's ridiculous. It's what environmentalists tell themselves so that they don't have to accept that the world is going to want more energy for another 25 or 30 years at a minimum. And Mark Carney will then be able to have an excuse fed to him by the anti-pipeline Julie Bruuen and Stephen Gibo that you don't have to build a pipeline. Alberta should be satisfied with the fact that there's not another pipeline. And they shouldn't feel offended. They shouldn't feel there's a need to separate. They should be like the radio host who phoned me from Ontario. Well, he said he's in favor of it. You guys should be happy. Well, I got to tell you something. Until we see more pipelines, until we see a greater commitment to the entire economy of this country and expanding, not just oil and gas, but critical minerals and all sorts of other business activities, productivity, and manufacturing, nobody out here is going to buy that these guys are any different than the Trudeau Liberals. For Postmedia, I'm Lorne Gunter.